Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Will Baggett with Executive Image, the industry leader in professional presence training, committed to helping you look the part and act the part to become the part. Visit us on the web at www.execimage.org.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Our guest today is Dr. Monique Marsh-Bell. Monique is the Assistant Athletics Director for Mental Health Services at Baylor University. Greetings, Monique. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Monique, you've been in that position you're in for, I guess, a little over a year and a half there with Baylor Athletics. You spent 6 years on campus at Baylor University with their counseling center there with the title of Senior Psychologist and Assistant Director of Community and Diversity Programs, somewhere around 8 years total with Baylor, and you had some time working with children and family care in the area of counseling too. I think it's a pretty impressive resume. Before we get started with the questions I have, I do want to ask one clarification question. You're not a sports psychologist, right? Can you tell me the difference between a sports psychologist and a clinical psychologist in terms of the outcomes in your profession?
I'm glad you asked that because that's a lot of confusion. I'm a psychologist that works in a sports setting, so everyone wants to put the title of sports psychologist on me, and that is not what I am. I'm a clinical psychologist. Our sports psychologists are focused on the performance and the mental skills of our student athletes to make them the best in their game, help them to focus on their performance and do well on the court or field. What I look at is their general mental health or general wellness, but there is overlap there. So I see student athletes sometimes and they come in because they can't focus on the court or are feeling some type of anxiety, and we find out through the assessment that I do is that they're having that in a lot of other areas of life, and they have generalized anxiety. And so I can help them with the generalized anxiety, and a lot of times that helps them not feel anxious on the court. If they're only having problems with their performance, then I would refer to a performance or sports psychologist.
Excellent. I actually didn't know that. I think that's pretty good information for us to continue the conversation so I don't make the mistake of calling you a sports psychologist. The reason I have you on is because I think it's unique that you worked on campus for a number of years with students, and then you were brought over to athletics working with student athletes. I think there's some benefits to that in terms of Baylor's student athletes that they have with someone with that experience. I wonder, when Baylor brought you over, what was I guess for the lack of a better term, what was the charge when they brought you over to athletics from campus at Baylor?
The number one charge was just to make sure that our student athletes have access to mental health care, and that could look very differently. Like you said, I'm a psychologist, so I do provide counseling services and crisis and case management, but also just making sure that our student athletes have other mental health related resources that they need. So I do case management in the form of referrals, making sure that they see psychiatry, whatever specialty area they need in the field of mental health. So that was the number one kind of charge that I had. The other one, the big one, was to make sure that the entire department was receiving education around mental health issues. So knowing what the signs and symptoms are, what to do in a mental health emergency, how to create an environment that is supportive of mental health and open to the idea of mental health and mental health care.
That second part, do you put on programs and seminars for the staff and coaches?
I do. So over the summer, when a lot of our athletes are gone, some of them are here, but I have more time where I'm not doing direct patient care with our student athletes. I do at least 4 different workshops, I would call them, and I offer them several times over the summer to provide flexibility for our coaches and staff to find time in their schedule to come to at least one of the seminars and learn about mental health.
I imagine that's probably pretty educational for them. Do they have questions? Or people, if I was in one of those sessions, I would ask a whole bunch of questions, especially because it's about the care of my student athletes, right?
Yes, they have questions. I try to make it interactive because I know sometimes mental health can be a heavy topic, so I don't want it to be a lecture. I want them to feel comfortable asking questions. We sometimes do some role plays. I give them real life situations and have them kind of talk through how they would handle those situations if that student athlete was on their team. And then I also meet with our coaches individually over the summer and talk to them about how I can help provide care for their specific student athletes on their team and plan for the semester of how we can provide that care for their student athletes. And they're obviously in that one-on-one ask questions then about how they can be more proactive in caring for their student athletes.
They're definitely an asset to those coaches. I wonder about your experience on campus. How has that proven to be a benefit for the student athletes that you work with now?
During my time on campus, I was able to work with a lot of different departments and meet a lot of great people, gain a better understanding of the resources that are available on campus. And so now with student athletes, I'm able to pick up the phone and call someone directly and make those connections so our student athletes can be utilizing the resources that are on campus. Sometimes I think maybe they know about the resources, sometimes they don't, sometimes they just don't know who to call or where to start. And so since I have those strong relationships with a lot of people on campus and a lot of departments, I'm able to help be that bridge for our student athletes to make sure that they're utilizing the services that are available to them.
I wonder if is that a two-way beneficial relationship? Like, does campus consider you an asset now that you're in athletics? Like, is there some in general benefits beyond just student athletes that you provide because you understand both settings?
I think it's been helpful because I've been able to help explain to some of our staff and faculty on campus how things work here, things that I didn't even know when I was on campus. Fun fact about me is that I'm not an athlete, have no athletic ability, it's just bad. So I didn't know a lot about the culture of athletics and what it means to be a student athlete. Even when I was in the counseling center, I remember times when athletes would come in and we would ask, when do you have availability for an appointment? And they would give one or two times. And in my mind thinking, you've got to have more time than this. And now that I'm here, I'm able to say they really don't have more time than that. If you're trying to fit them in to Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 time slot, sometimes they don't have more than the one or two times that they give you. So I think having that trust and relationship with people on campus and me being able to say, hey, this is what's happening here, and this is kind of the world that our student athletes are in, I think that's been helpful for some of our other staff to gain a better understanding of the athletic department and our student athletes' worlds.
That's definitely a benefit, right? Because there are some faculty and staff who do not understand and actually don't want to. It sounds like this was educational for you too. This whole transition has been an educational process for you too.
Oh, absolutely. I know way more about sports now than I ever have. Still learning, but definitely have learned a lot.
That's funny. You mentioned one thing there, and you talk about the differences between student athletes and the general student body when you talk about counseling. I guess definitely time availability, time restraints are one of the biggest differences. Are there any other differences that you've noticed between the two groups of students on campus?
Yeah, in addition to time, I think the pressure of being a student athlete is something that our students who don't engage in sports in this way don't have to deal with. So it can be a protective factor because our student athletes have kind of built-in family in their teams. They come in kind of with already a social group where other students are trying to find their group and find their niche. So in that way, it's a plus. But then there are other ways that it's an extra stressor. When, like I said, I'm able to look at their schedule now, and even when I'm trying to find time to meet with them for 30, 45 hour-long appointment, sometimes the space is just not there. So having to manage being a college student, the academic portion, the social portion, you're still connected with your family back home and things that may be happening there, and then all the requirements of being a student athlete, it's just something that other students, that one extra piece is something that our other students just don't have to deal with.
Right. It's interesting. My time as a student athlete, I go to like bowl games now, or I'll go to a Final Four where I went to Michigan State, where Michigan State is playing, and you walk around, I see all this green and white and a whole bunch of people, all different ages, and I almost feel like I don't know anyone. I'm like, the only people I know are the people basically on the football team or who were athletes at the time, or maybe the people I lived in a dorm with my freshman or sophomore year, and it's a little disappointing to me. I don't know how that ties into the psychology of being a student athlete, but I know that transition and engaging with campus is probably something that affects people when they get older, last couple years of school, or maybe even after they graduate?
Yeah, I mean, there's other pieces of that, right? If you are on a team and maybe you don't fit in as well with your teammates, you don't get the option of choosing another friend group like other students might be able to. You are with them all the time. You probably live with them. You're traveling with them. You maybe come to college also want to pledge a fraternity or a sorority. The time that that takes, are you actually going to have the time to do that? And then a lot of times our athletes don't have those friendships across even sports. Um, I have some people here that it's interesting. I have a couple of student athletes that are twins, and they're not with their twin anymore. And I'm like, there's someone else on another team that is going through this exact same experience, and they don't even know that. And
That's interesting. Super interesting. So when they hired you, did they give you some type of guiding principles for the position or specific programs, like you mentioned, the educating the staff and administration coaches? Are there some specific values in addition to the values of the department that they wanted specifically for the position you're in?
well, of course, the values of our university, the values of our department, but the NCAA definitely did do some research and have guidelines for mental health services for student athletes. And so that is what I used to determine what programming I'm going to do, how things are going to run when it comes to athletics mental health services, making sure that all our incoming athletes have a mental health screening. They go through a mental health screening so we can be proactive if they're coming in dealing with any mental health issues. Making sure that I'm working to decrease the stigma and what that looks like in an athletic department. So all of the programming that I do, all of the education that I provide somehow falls into those 4 principles that the NCAA has given us to make sure that we are providing the best care for our student athletes.
When you talk to your colleagues across the country in charge of mental health, welfare of student athletes, is there, like, if you could categorize 1 or 2 or 3 concerns that you guys have for student athletes that you've seen across the board, is there a specific area, I guess, that if you guys were all talking to each other that you have a concern with the future and student athletes?
I think in general our concern, both in athletics and just on college campuses, is the increased prevalence of mental health. If you look 10 years ago, the number of students, college students and college student athletes that are dealing with mental health issues is astronomical compared to where it used to be. And so that's a concern. How are we going to care for our student athletes? How do we continue to provide them the best care, knowing that more and more of them are dealing with mental health issues, some coming in already dealing with mental health issues?
So here's what I've always wondered about that. Are there more people dealing with mental health issues, or do more people present the issues and are not trying to hide them like people my age probably would have done back in the 90s? I mean, what is it really, more people have mental health issues? Or I always tried to understand that.
Honestly, we're still trying to understand it. I think
everybody is. Okay.
I don't fall into a specific camp or philosophy around that. I think there's a lot of things at play. Definitely, and thinking about student athletes specifically, we have more professional athletes who are speaking out about their mental health, which is making it a little more acceptable for people to say, yes, I'm struggling with anxiety, depression, whatever it might be. There's been a lot of research about just the change in culture, even how social media plays into our mental health and how we feel about ourselves, the rate of depression and anxiety related to mental health or social media usage. So I think there's a lot of different things that are not even necessarily the cause, but play a part in why we're seeing this spike. But at this point, we don't have one thing that we could put our finger on. There's just a lot of things at play right now.
Yeah, and actually it doesn't matter, right? We'll just try to help everybody out.
Yeah.
Who cares what the reasons are? Okay, Monique, I'll ask 2 or 3 questions here and then we wrap. One specifically, you being a person of color, I wonder if that makes it easier for some of the student athletes of color or who come from diverse backgrounds to come and talk to you when they have issues or if they have a crisis or something like that. Is that something that you see? Would you be able to tell the difference, like that type of thing? Because the stigma is a lot different for people of color in terms of mental health and psychology.
Absolutely. When I was on campus, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, when they would try to get students of color to come to the counseling center, one of the conversations that Miss Beverly would have with the students that she shared with me is that there's a woman of color over there, and sometimes that was the that was the thing that got them in the door. Especially because people of color typically underutilize mental health resources and think that's not something that we do. So to have someone of color doing that, providing that service, it definitely breaks down a barrier. Over here, I see the same thing sometimes, especially when I first got here, and people were sharing that, oh, we have a counselor on staff now. There's a mental health provider. When athletes would get to my office, I had one young man like stop in the doorway and was like, "You're black." I was like, "I am." Last time I checked, and we had a really good conversation about that, and he kept coming back. So I definitely think that it does help our students of color feel more comfortable.
My last question here, Monique, is about the staff, the coaches, the administration, being somebody whose job it is to, I guess, assess people's mental well-being. I imagine you can probably look at the staff and coaches and probably think this person is probably going through something or probably needs to see somebody. What do you do in that situation? Because your primary client are student athletes. How would you handle that if the person next to you or in your office next to you, or you see a coach and it looks like they may be going through something? Tell me about that part. That has to be a concern of yours, especially in athletics where the hours are crazy.
Yeah, I make referrals all the time for our coaches and staff and administration. Baylor has a employee assistance program where we get, I believe, 4 or 5 free counseling sessions. So I always give that resource. And then because I know people in the community, I make referrals for community providers. I don't provide care for our coaches and staff. I wouldn't even have the time, really, with how my schedule is with our student athletes. But I do see that as a responsibility of mine as a professional. I mean, anybody off the street sometimes when they find out what I do, they ask me, do I know someone or do I have a private practice? And so that's not anything that I think is unusual for me to do as a psychologist. And the other thing that I do when I do my summer trainings is make sure that I include that information. We have an EAP program. You can get free counseling through there. There are resources in the community that I can get you connected with to make sure that our coaches and staff know that they also have access to mental health care.
Right, which is very important, right?
Yes.
The student athletes might be doing all right, but if the staff is awful, especially in the leadership and influential position they're in, they could be causing some type of turmoil for the student athletes in their role as leaders. Well, Monique, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Dr. Monique Marsh-Bell. She's the Assistant Athletics Director for Mental Health Services at Baylor University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.